Today, this week's sutta is an unusual one, given that it comes to us from the Thera. The Thera is a book from the Khuddaka Nikaya, the minor discourses. Interestingly enough, it's called minor, but it has some of the most extensive books found within the Dhamma, within the Nikayas. I might have mentioned before, the Sutta Nipata, some of the earliest teachings of Lord Buddha on record are found within the Sutta Nipata. A very famous one, a book that is the Dhammapada, also found within the Khuddaka Nikaya. And then we have the Udana, and then we have the Itivuttaka, inspired utterances, and thus have I heard sections, or so I've heard, which we get from Lady Kujuttara. And then we have the Thera and the Theri, so which makes up the 6 main books. Later on, over the centuries, after the death of Lord Buddha and the early Arya Savakas, the noble disciples, we find numerous other books being added. Those are not part of the Nikayas, the original, in my opinion, but they were added, although today they're accepted as part of the Khuddaka. Anyhow, the Thera are the verses of the Arahant Bhikkhus, the great masters, many of whom were direct students of Lord Buddha. Others were the students of Lord Buddha's main chief disciples. In some cases, some of these bhikkhus had never seen Lord Buddha, but they were nevertheless his students, because they took what he had taught them through the lineage as if it was given to them directly by Lord Buddha. Today's sutta happens to be a sutta, or a verse, a set of verses, actually. Gatha is the plural of the Thera's verses. It is from a Venerable Bhikkhu who happened to be a direct student of Lord Buddha. However, he was not perceived as such. In fact, he was looked down upon. He's the very well known in Buddhist circles, Chulapanthaka. In Buddhist countries, he's very well known in stories and the legends. And today's series of verses, which I don't normally cover the Thera verses, but perhaps I need to do more of them in these series. But I'm currently in the process of translating the whole Thera. So I just finished the first book of the Thera, so the first verse sections. Anyhow, today's verses comes from the Thera, the Khuddaka Nikaya's Thera, and it's from the Dasaka Nipata, the book of the 10s, or the 10 verses, and from the part 1 section, which is Patamavagga. It is the Chulapantaka Thera verses that we will be going over, or Chulapantaka Thera Gatha. It's Thera number 10.4. Now, this sutta, or this series of verses, sutta means a discourse, by the way, but we're used to hearing, whenever it's from the Nikayas or the Pali sources, we always presume it's a suttas. Originally, they're actually called suttantas. But in this case, it's not a dialogue or a discourse, but it is an utterance made by a series of verses made by the individual Bhikkhu in this case, arahant, something that comes, shoots off of either at the moment of realization, right after, or later on when discussing it, or being inspired as they're giving a Dhamma talk, or talking with others, or their students, disciples. So it becomes recorded in the minds of the listeners. So that's how we've gotten them, received them through the centuries. And we're so thankful that whoever listened to it or recorded it somehow in their mind, memory, has been able to do so that we have these treasures today. So I'm going to do something unusual today in the sense that I will recite, I will read actually, the verses of the Venerable Cu apanthaka without commenting on it. And then I will, after I've read the whole series of verses, I will come back and give you the background story and make some comments. And then at the end, hopefully we'll have enough time for me to go over the whole series of verses, so you have hopefully a better appreciation given the context and what it involved. What do these verses mean ultimately? So Thera Gatha 10.4, Chula Pantaka Thera Gatha. So please allow these words to find solace, a place of rest in your heart as you're listening. You can attain Magga and Phala simply by listening to the Dhamma. Make no mistake about that. So make it your meditation. I was hopelessly slow in my progress, struggling helplessly with the tedious pace of a snail. Always looked down upon, mocked, and despised, not only by all those who knew me, but all those who'd never even seen me, where even my own brother, my flesh and blood too, also shunned and tried getting rid of me, scolding and insisting upon me to leave, as he repeatedly commanded, "Just get out already, never come back here ever again." Being pushed out like that, I stood there at the monastery's gate, left behind by my sangha, others. I found myself all alone, kicked out and abandoned, and in tears, with a heart that was now even more saddened and full of longing for the Dhamma. Then, out of nowhere, the Blessed One appeared, as the king of the Sangha approached with his soft and accepting smile, and ever so softly touched and caressed my head with sweet kind-heartedness. Then, taking me by the arm, he led me back into the courtyard of the monastery. Soon after, the great teacher, out of his limitless compassion, handed me a piece of clean cloth to be used for wiping the feet, as he instructed me. Just put all your attention on this. Resolutely focus it only upon this cloth. And as you rub it clean, continue striking away the dirt from it. Upon listening to my teacher's direct instruction given to me, I quickly and delightedly began applying the method with such unprecedented determination, exactly as he advised. Soon after, I entered into deep samadhi, working my way through the path, taking me straight to the crown of all goals within the holy life. Suddenly, I clearly saw my previous births in all their details, along with the divine eye that arose in me, piercing through with its purity wherever I turned to look. I realized then and there how the three knowledges have been attained by me. Thus, completed was now the dispensation of my teacher, the Buddha. Having now fulfilled the task, I created 1,000 versions of apanthaka, all scattered around me, engaged in different activities around the monastery. Meanwhile, I sat there within the charming mango orchard, quietly waiting until the hour for the lunch offering would be announced. It was then that the messenger arrived, having been sent by the teacher himself. Later, when he finally approached again, stating how the master had called for me, speedily I left, flying through the sky, and appeared among the gathering of bhikkhus. Having humbly worshipped and touched the teacher's feet with my head, I then sat down to one side, ready to accept the meal with the others, knowing his bhikkhus were now all present. The Blessed One made sure I was seated alongside my fellow bhikkhus, and only then proceeded to receive the gift of dana that was offered to the Sangha. It was in this manner that the worthiest of all, the greatest among all recipients of truly worthy and heartfelt offerings, the unsurpassed field of merits everywhere, accepted that day the gift of dana out of his limitless compassion for all in the entire existence. These were the verses spoken by the Venerable Cu. Now, a little bit of background. Usually, individuals come across the Venerable Chula Pantaka and in history of the Dhamma through the Dhammapada. In fact, there's a verse, number 25, in the Dhammapada, where we see Lord Buddha walking accompanied by other bhikkhus, and he notices Venerable Chula Pantaka sitting and meditating, and in such an inspiring way. And Lord Buddha's moved. All of the Dhammapada verses of Lord Buddha's are actually his inspired utterances, meaning he was moved. He was, no one asked him necessarily a question, but he was inspired to say something. And that's how we have the Dhammapada verses. I was earlier mentioning about the Thera or Therigatha verses, but in this case, the Dhammapada verses, and specifically number 25, is about Venerable Chula Pantaka, from where we get this entry point into who this bhikkhu was, Chula Pantaka. And the verse, I'll read it, I have it here, that Lord Buddha uttered is, it's a one verse, 4 lines. Through diligent and dedicated hard work, with strong endeavor and self-restraint, the wise man turns himself into an island that no flood could ever overwhelm. In Pali it is Uttanena pamadena samyamena damena cha dipankairatha medhavi yang ogho nabikirati. Through diligent and dedicated hard work, with strong endeavor and self-restraint, the wise man turns himself into an island that no flood could ever overwhelm. Strong endeavor. Well, we see that in the life of Chula Pantaka, which I'm about to share here. They were two brothers. One, his elder brother, was Mahapantaka, and he was the Chula. Maha means the great or the elder, and Chula means the younger or the one who's well, younger than him. Yes. So they had parents who had eloped, and they were conceived while their parents were away from the grandparents, and typically they would have been, together as a one family, but they were afraid, the mom and dad, to go back, specifically to the maternal grandparents, the father and mother of their mother, Chula Pantaka and Mahapantaka's. So finally, they are able to go and see their grandparents, because the mother at least insists that, well, at least they have to see who their grandparents are. But before they get there, they send someone, a messenger, that we are coming, and you have two grandchildren, two boys. And the grandparents decide that, well, it will be very inappropriate, this and that, and they have their own reasons in their mind that it would be unacceptable for you all to come here, especially you, daughter, and our son-in-law, to be accepted back. However, we will accept the two grandchildren, the two grandsons. But then he nevertheless send back a case full of gold and wealth, and they say, but this is your inheritance. You can take this and go, and you can leave the boys with us if you wish. But we do not want to see you, to the daughter and the son-in-law. So they take the money and they send the boys with the messenger to the grandparents. And the grandparents, especially the grandfather, is a banker. So he raises them, both grandsons. And but he's also, in time, he finds, the grandfather finds the Dhamma to be close to his heart. So he ends up taking Mahapantaka, the eldest grandson, with him to hear Lord Buddha give Dhamma talks, discourses, whenever he was in town, which is in Rajagaha. So specifically, by the way, the verse that I just recited, the one that Lord Buddha recited from Dhammapada, verse 25, was spoken at the Veluvana monastery, which is in Rajagaha. Veluvana monastery was donated to Lord Buddha by King Bimbisara. That was the very first monastery that was offered to Lord Buddha, and that was accepted. And it's a very famous in Buddhist history. So anyhow, that is where this was taking place. Now, in time, as Mahapantaka goes to hear Lord Buddha speak, he is moved and inspired, and he turns back, goes to his grandfather and says, I would very much love to go forth and become a monk. And the grandfather really is moved and is very supportive and says, absolutely. So he gives him his blessings and approval. So Mahapantaka goes and becomes a monk. In time, he even becomes an arahant. Mahapantaka, once he's already ordained as a bhikkhu. And then he goes back and forth and visits his younger brother, who is now very touched by the character and stature and the way his brother behaves, and is moved by the Dhamma, that he also wants to go forth, and the grandfather is very pleased, and he gives him his blessings as well. Now, after his ordination, Venerable Chula Pantaka was very slow in his retention of information. where the texts say how even having spent 4 months trying to remember and memorize a single verse that the Lord Buddha had spoken, he couldn't manage. By the way, the very first set of verses I read of Venerable Chula Pantaka, that is from the verses, that section of 10 verses. Those were spoken by him post Arahantship. So just to get you a preview of what he had to struggle with, he couldn't even memorize a single verse. So this became such a big issue, it became such a big problem, a thorn in the side of Venerable Mahapantaka, his elder brother, and the other bhikkhus in the monastery, where they were very upset to the point where they were embarrassed. Because a bhikkhu is supposed to know at least a little bit of Dhamma, and people would ask, "Oh, Bhante, could you give us a Dhamma talk today?" And he didn't know what to say. He didn't know. So people were calling him names. So this was you can imagine the emotional and psychological state, social status also within the Sangha towards Venerable Chula Pantaka. Now, at that time, the Venerable Mahapantaka was also assigned the position of the designator of tokens, or there's a title where last week I think I mentioned Venerable Dabba. He was one of the first to actually, if not the first, who had that position, whereby, let's say, lay people would come and invite the bhikkhus over for lunch the next day, the following day. But they usually will say, Bhante, we have enough food for tomorrow for 10 bhikkhus. Okay. So they would go and tell, the layperson would go and tell the designator, the one who would give tokens, in the sense that only those bhikkhus who had not gone, so there's a tally, or there's a list of names that have not yet been the ones who go to a layperson's house, especially because the food will be of a higher quality most often when you're going to an invitation, a place where there's an invite and there's food prepared, versus you going from door to door, which you might have a door open or not to you to give you some food. So Lord Buddha, to make sure that everything was even with everyone, he had approved the designation of these monks who would know which monk, who among them is next in line to go to the layperson's lunch dana offered. So it would be sent, the group of monks, or maybe 1 or 2 or 4 or 10 or 60, whatever the number may be, that is sufficient. There's enough food for them to eat without, there being an embarrassing moment. He would be the one who designates. And usually they were arahants, the designators. So no one could later on come and say, well, there's favoritism going on. So in the case of Venerable Mahapantaka, he was, the layperson, the supporter, very well-known, wealthy medical doctor of King Bimbisara himself, approached, and he was the one who had offered another arama, or in the case of the grove or park, that was mango orchard park. So he had offered it to the Sangha, but he was also the physician to Lord Buddha himself, Jivaka. So one day he comes to the monastery and he speaks to Venerable Mahapantaka and says, Bhante, I would like to invite the whole Sangha in the monastery to my home tomorrow for the day's lunch, for the day's meal. And could you give me the number of how many monks there are? So this is where it gets interesting, one might say. Venerable Mahapantaka knew, of course, every single bhikkhu and samanera within the monastery, and on top of whom is Lord Buddha and himself included, Mahapantaka. However, he does something unusual. He excludes his brother. He gives one number less, one bhikkhu less on the list of invitees, so that the jivaka's staff and the chefs or the cooks or preparing the meal would accordingly prepare the food. But they always would make more. But anyhow, it's not the matter of the food, but the places where they will have to sit. So they have to accommodate hundreds of monks. So you can imagine the big house that Jivaka, or the palace that he had. He was very, very wealthy. So what they have done, meanwhile, Mahapantaka and the other bhikkhus, they had pushed him aside. And he heard this. He saw this. He saw that he was abandoned. And imagine your own brother turning his back on you in the presence of other bhikkhus. That means basically severing of the relationship. And you're the one who's being severed, the relationship of. So you're on the receiving end of such a terrible, terrible reality. Because everyone was looking down upon Venerable Chulapantaka as someone who was inept at best. So they kept on telling him, leave, leave, disrobe and leave. Don't you get it? Leave. You're not cut out for this. Some of them might have been coming, perhaps, to give them the benefit of a doubt, from a good place, perhaps. But they did not know the past of Venerable Chulapantaka. They did not know his mind, including his own brother, did not see that. So, there he was, Venerable Chulapantaka at the gate of the monastery, kicked out, abandoned, and you can imagine him with his head drooping. Everyone has left. Everyone has left for lunch. Not only that, but they've also kicked you out of the Sangha, in a sense. Forced you. It was at that moment that Lord Buddha gets involved, because he sees with his mind what was happening. And he approaches Venerable Chulapantaka. And he comes to him and he caresses his forehead and just touches him. We rarely see such incidents, such moments of humanity being mentioned in the suttas like this. But this is one beautiful moment. We've seen Lord Buddha's compassion, and he had Mahakaruna. But to see that physical touch, that rare occurrence, because it must have been devastating for Venerable Chulapantaka to be there. So he needed that attention, that special attention. And Lord Buddha even touches his arm and he leads him back into the monastery with a smile. With a smile. What a beautiful humanity being demonstrated there. There isn't that rigidity, there isn't that strictness, and this is engaged Buddhism. That's why, excuse me, I laugh when people say, now, we have to start a new branch of Buddhism, engaged Buddhism, or it's redundant, it's stupid, it's silly. The Dhamma cannot be not engaged. It is all about engagement, humanity, kindness, in action. Dhamma is all that put into action. So Lord Buddha leads him back into the courtyard of this lovely monastery, which has mango trees all over. And he gives him a clean cloth, which as bhikkhus, or especially in the monastery, there would be these cloths that are allowable to be there, and they're kept clean, and unless they're used, and they're used for the bhikkhus, when those bhikkhus, excuse me, especially all bhikkhus, but especially those who would come back from Pindapada with their feet dirty because they were walking barefoot. So those towels were used for that. But in the verses, we see the clean cloth mentioned. So Lord Buddha is giving Venerable Chulapantaka a clean cloth, and he gives him an instruction. That is his meditation instruction, which is, he says, you hold this and you wipe away, strike away the dirt. Typically, that's how it's translated. But in a minute, we'll probe that together. But in Pali, the term is Rajo Haranang. So he says, say that as you wipe away the dirt, as you use your fingers holding this piece of clean cloth. Rajo Haranang, Rajo Haranang, Rajo Haranang, Rajo Haranang, Rajo Haranang. Because Lord Buddha knew that Venerable Chulapantaka is unable to memorize. Because he also saw that in his past lives, Venerable Chulapantaka had dishonored or had made fun of noble ones. And that's how usually there is mental disorders or dullness or retardation happening in individuals, or learning disabilities, or being slow. Because the heart might want the Dhamma, but the mind is not equipped, it's not matched, it's not in balance with the heart's desire to attain. That's why when I say and when I insist that we need to be grateful that we do have a brain, we do have a mind that functions, that can actually appreciate and practice and memorize at least a verse, it's wonderful. It's wonderful. It's such a big thing to be grateful for. So, as and Lord Buddha leaves, he goes to the lunch dana. But he says, do that, knowing full well that Venerable Chulapantaka was all alone in the monastery, this big monastery. Meanwhile, Venerable Chulapantaka goes on rubbing and rubbing and rubbing with his fingers this clean piece of white cloth. And then suddenly, he realizes something. After a while, he notices that the cloth itself had turned dirty because of, this normal oils that come out along with sweat, but especially oils from the skin's pores and glands. It had turned dirty. And he was stunned because what's happening here? He was able to see impermanence taking shape because he was like, wait a minute, what? So he pauses, realizing something's going on. At that moment, Lord Buddha sends, they say, his radiance body. So basically, he appeared in front of Chulapantaka in the monastery to give him his final instruction. Just the right teaching at the right time. And there's a group of bhikkhus or students who have, and bhikkhunis, of course, who have received that special direct instruction prior to them attaining arahantship from Lord Buddha himself. So that makes them even more special. So Venerable Chulapantaka was one of those where Lord Buddha had to intervene, like the case was with Venerable Mahamoggallana, etc. So basically, Lord Buddha says, it is not the piece of cloth alone that turns dirty with the dust. So now he's helping him to switch his gaze from the cloth that's turning dirty to himself. Because otherwise he was just stuck on Rajo Haranang, Rajo Haranang, Rajo Haranang, striking away hitting away, removing the dirt, the impurities. The Lord Buddha says, within oneself also there exists dusts, dirt. It is only by removing the dirt could one achieve one's goal and attain arahantship. So now Venerable Apanthaka understands that this has nothing to do with the cloth. But he needed to touch something. In modern teaching modalities, pedagogical devices, people 2,600 years later come up with learning styles. Lord Buddha knew about it. It's called kinesthetic or tactile perception. The person needs to hold things, especially with children trying to learn math. Many people have a difficulty with the abstract or concepts of math, mathematical equations, even arithmetic. But you give them things that they can touch, such as objects, round balls, wooden pieces, things, tiny little characters, plastic, maquettes, something, and they will know, or fruits, different fruits, and they can count, or beans and marbles. They will hold and touch, and now they know what it means 3 times 5. They know it because they've touched it. So Lord Buddha used kinesthetic learning modalities to get him to ground himself, because conceptually he was no way going to be able to catch those abstractions, such as anicca. He saw it in front of him. He also saw it. So there was also visual learning, which usually is the second step. But he was also teaching him with words. So it's all coming together. And something has to be said about the dirt being removed, because oftentimes what translators use is the term dust or dirt or impurity. But it's not just that. Here, Rajo Haranang means Rajo can be seen as lust, greed. Raja or Roga is the same in this case, in this context. So it means passion has to be driven out of the heart. That is an impurity. Because unless that passion, that Raja, is abandoned, then you cannot remove the impurities from the heart, from the defilements, and the defilements from the heart, the chitta. Now, the passion might have different connotations for you. You might be passionate about your job. You might be passionate about your children, about your marriage, about your relationship with your family, with your whatever, wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, something. About some cause. You might be passionate about, climate change. Passionate about your culture. You're passionate about a group of people, your ancestry, you name it, your body, how you look, some feature, or some ability, your ability to speak many languages, for example, or how well you get along with people. You might be passionate about those things, or passionate about cleanliness, or even your practice. There are people who are very passionate about practicing sila. That's an oxymoron. You see this happen in the world of, some Buddhist traditions, where they are extremely passionate raga. So that defeats the purpose. But another way of understanding Rajo Haranang is the other aspect of Rajo, meaning dosa or hatred, anger, the heat. You can't have passion without heat, some type of heat. So same thing happens. So it's not necessarily dirt that's being stricken off the piece of white cloth that is no longer white, but the whiteness of the clean cloth is something that was also like a baseline to help Venerable Chula Pantaka to know a before to the after. The after was his fingers had touched it so much, the oil had gone it so much, the dirt had caught on, and now it's dirty. Versus, oh yes, but I remember it was white, it was clean. So there is hope for me. So that is what's happening. He is relinquishing his attachment to the fact that he was dumb, that he was, I know we don't use that term, but retarded, that he was slow, that he was less than. He was a firm believer in that because he had seen evidence of that. He had also seen how that was getting him the wrong attention all throughout his life, including his own flesh and blood abandoning him. And then you have the other aspect of Rajo, which is the delusion, which is the moha aspect of the dirt. So it's not dirt that it was being stricken off. Lord Buddha wanted him to learn the Dhamma. It's interesting how Lord Buddha's technique or techniques, his method of delivery is superlative, incomparable teacher of gods and men, it's called, when we do our attributes of Lord Buddha. When we venerate that term, Lord Buddha is not even physically there, but already these things, these sparks are flying through the inside Venerable Chula Pantaka's brain. You can almost see it visually. All the neurons are working like crazy. Obstacles, boulders are coming down, are being obliterated by the millisecond. And Venerable Chula Pantaka got the message, and he attains arahantship. Right there. But why a cloth? Why not something else? You had another bhikkhu where Lord Buddha, who had actually been a jeweler to the king, so he knew fine things. He knew how to appreciate refined things, delicate works of art. So he was a master at that. But he had relinquished that life and he had become a monk. But he was struggling so much to attain. He couldn't concentrate. In the case of that bhikkhu, Lord Buddha sees his way of processing, and he hands him a flower, a beautiful flower that he creates, and just hands it over. And that bhikkhu is stunned because he always appreciated beauty. That got his attention. That got his heart connected to what was about to be taught to him. And Lord Buddha gives him the flower and he says, let this be your object of meditation. And he's passionate about the beauty and the flower having that beautiful quality. But Lord Buddha willed it that flower wilted in front of his eyes. And that bhikkhu saw that beautiful flower all of a sudden fade away and become nothing. And he got it. We have different ways of learning. Each of you have different avenues or streets or alleyways whereby you could understand the Dhamma. You can appreciate the Dhamma. You can see because of our past. So, Venerable Chula Pantaka used to be a king in one of his past lives. And one time, being a king, he has all the, he was out, I think he was out, or anyhow, it was one of those very, very hot summer seasons in India. And he was so sweaty. So he was sweating and he grabbed pieces of the cloth, and he's a king, so he's going to have clean cloth. So every time he wiped his forehead, he would look down upon this cloth and he would see this beautiful, clean cloth, maybe silk, maybe something similar, or even cotton or linen. and he would see it dirty. So that got him to see anicca, but he didn't understand what was that. Every time he would wipe his head, he would turn darker. Lord Buddha saw that in his mind. That was going to be the entryway to arahantship for Venerable Cu apanthaka now. Why? Because the seeds of insight were there. So he had his first insight as a king, wiping his forehead dry. So Lord Buddha saw that. And he used that as the key, which worked. So in the commentaries it says, the piece of cloth, though clean, has changed its nature, and because of this body of mine, it has become soiled. That was his insight. Venerable Cu apanthaka's insight as the king back then. But it doesn't stay like that, because so long as we keep coming back to life, through samsara, going through birth, death, we are not necessarily always holding on to the Dhamma, to high, wholesome values. We commit actions which often are unwholesome. And because of those unwholesome actions, we have to deal with their consequences. Often that means veils will be pulled in front of our eyes. So the insights from a past life will not necessarily bear fruit immediately, progressively. Why? Because we've done things that we have to deal with. That's why Lord Buddha always says, the whole point of the Dhamma is to cut you clean from samsara, period. Any realm is a bad realm to end up in. So if you found the Dhamma, stick to it, finish the job, at least attain sotapatti, and release yourself from that state of perplexed uncertainty. Because there's a countless series of mountains of heavy-duty kamma, vipaka, that we have to deal with. We don't know when those bad actions are going to come back to us in the form of their fruits, and we will have to face them so long as we're alive, but not when you are on the path, set on the path. That's why we call it sotapatti. You're inside, you have won the stream, you're a stream winner, you're entered, you're in the path. So don't worry, it's only a matter of time before you attain arahantship. And once that takes place, that's the end of it. That's the end of that life. Will be the end of you having to deal with any further kamma once you close your eyes in that life. So now Venerable Cu apanthaka suddenly sees his past lives also. And he understands what Lord Buddha knew about his past as the king. And he's like, all the pieces come together. That's why it's good to, when the practitioner has developed equanimity to such a depth, to also, if they want to check their past lives and inquire as to, why do I have this? Why do I have that? Why do I get this? Or why have I faced these challenges in this life? Being provided answers through seeing your past lives can really be relieving. So you don't have to worry about that. It makes sense now. Okay, so you can go on with the business at hand, meaning you can go on living your life without having to feel like there's a conspiracy against you in this cosmos. No, we are responsible for whatever is taking place to us because it was done by us. That's it. That's the kamma principle. So he understood. Because now he, as an arahant, he says, so he has the divine eye. So now he sees the bhikkhus sitting there in the hall, the lunch hall, I guess, with Lord Buddha at the head, haven't yet started eating. So he says, he looks around the monastery and he sees that there's no other human being there. Meanwhile, Lord Buddha immediately knew when Venerable Chulapantaka attained arahantship, of course. And Jivaka comes, the offerer of lunch, and as it is tradition, they will pour water upon the senior most bhikkhu's hands. It's a tradition. So if Lord Buddha would wash his right hand usually, that means the lunch dana has begun officially. That's part of the ceremony. That means Lord Buddha has accepted the dana. But Jivaka comes into with this, pitcher of water to pour on Lord Buddha's hand, and Lord Buddha stops him and he says, "Are we all here?" And Jivaka looks around obviously to his assistants, and he's like, "Yes, Bhante. Yeah, I asked Venerable Mahapantaka yesterday, and he said these are the numbers, and we counted. They're all here." And Lord Buddha says, "There is one more left in the monastery." Jivaka goes, "Really, Bhante? I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." So he sends an aide, a messenger to the monastery immediately. He goes there, and meanwhile, Venerable Chulapantaka sees this with the divine eye taking place. Before the messenger gets there, guess what he does? With his divine eye, he sees that, but he has perfected the iddhipadas, the ability to, the iddhis in this case, and the powers, psychic powers, and he immediately goes ahead and fills up the monastery with bhikkhus, not just a few hundred, mind you, but no less than 1,000. So now the monastery is packed with bhikkhus, but not any bhikkhu, they're all copies of himself. And they're all engaged in different activities. One is sweeping the floor, the other one is patching the roof, maybe the other one's doing this or cleaning up that. No talking, they're just there. So the messenger gets there, he's stunned to the point where he's a bit terrified. It's buzzing with action. And he runs back to Jivaka and to the palace and he says, it was full of monks, not just one. And now Jivaka is completely surprised, and he says, "Bhante, what should we, do?" And Lord Buddha says, "Send the messenger back and tell him, Chulapantaka, the Lord asking you, who is Chulapantaka?" That's the thing. So the messenger says, "Yes, Lord." So he rushes back to the monastery. Now the 1,000 monks are there, plus Venerable Chulapantaka, who happens to be sitting, meditating close by under the mango orchard. So the messenger says, "Where is Venerable Chulapantaka?" And everybody's hand goes up. "I am Chulapantaka, I am Chulapantaka." So now he's really, stunned beyond and is terrified again. And so he rushes back. Imagine 1,000 people all of a sudden address you and say the same thing. Can be quite, a lot for the cognitive brain to handle, right? So now the man is like shivering this, and he goes to Lord Buddha, and Lord Buddha says, "Okay, go to the monastery again and say, will Venerable Chulapantaka present himself? The Blessed Lord is asking for him." But the person says, "Yes, okay, Bhante." He says, "Oh, hold on. Before, right after you say that, the first one who raises his hand, grab hold of his robe. That's the Venerable Chulapantaka we want." He says, "Yes, Master." So he goes. And again, he approaches the monastery and he goes in, and all the monks are there, and he says, Venerable Chula Pantaka, Bante, Lord Buddha wants you to be there for lunch. And, the first hand that comes up, he goes and grabs him immediately, the robe, and everyone else disappears. Every one of the 1,000 bhikkhus, because he had just created them. They're mind-made. Manomaya. Remember the verses from the Dhammapada? From the first verse of the Dhammapada? Manomaya. So, where was I? So now, as if that was not enough, Venerable Chula Pantaka, to exercise is a bit. So sometimes people forget that even after arahantship, an enlightened and awakened person might, well, often, based on what I've read and seen, they will keep some aspects of their personality because they still have the 5 aggregates, right? So he does not walk there with the messenger, mind you. He flies there because he has the ability to. He has those powers. He decides to fly there. So he doesn't want to make Lord Buddha wait more than he's already had to. So he approaches, and you can imagine the other bhikkhus, some of them shaking because they were not all arahants, especially those that were pointing the finger outward away from the monastery as they were looking at him and saying, you don't belong here, leave. And they were now seeing an arahant, bhikkhu, land in front of them, having flown from Veluvana monastery. So you can goose flesh much. And Venerable Chula Pantaka immediately, as a student is supposed to do, immediately goes to Lord Buddha, his teacher, and he bows down and he touches Lord Buddha's feet with his head. For so many things. For the humanity, for the love. He was more than a mother, more than a father, more than a grandfather, grandparent, more than a brother to him. And he led him out of samsara. He had so much tenderness, so much patience and compassion. And that is a quality that we have to emulate in us, but especially as teachers. To have that level of patience is a goal, it must be there in your repertoire as a teacher. You have to. Otherwise, you will have to say goodbye to so many students that come along the way. You have to be forgiving, and that forgiveness will also allow the student to forgive themselves. Otherwise, where's the Dhamma? Really? But here was Chula Pantaka, an arahant, and Lord Buddha points him. He says, go and sit among your brothers. And he goes and, there's a seat there for him, of course. And he sits there, and Lord Buddha sees that all of his bhikkhus are ready at the table, waiting for him. That is the time where Lord Buddha gives the cue to Jivaka to pour the water. That meant that the lunch dana was now accepted. Then, after the meal was over, Lord Buddha tells Jivaka, go and hold Venerable Chula Pantaka's bowl, the Arahant Chula Pantaka, which he does. And Lord Buddha gives Chula Pantaka the signal that it is time for you to give a Dhamma talk. Imagine sitting there in front of your own brother, an Arahant, nevertheless, and the other bhikkhus, plus your own teacher, the king of the Dhamma, sitting there, giving you the opportunity to give a Dhamma talk. And he gives a wonderful Dhamma talk. Unfortunately, we don't have a record of what he said, but we can get the gist of it, given what has happened. And sometime later is when Venerable Cu apanthaka is inspired to say the verses that I read to you in the beginning. So I would like to read it again, the verses that were spoken by Venerable Cu apanthaka, and see if you can, given now what you already have with knowledge, information, and a background that I tried to share with you, see if you can sit with these verses and allow it to become your meditation object for now, during this sit. So, Thera Gata 10.4, Cu apanthaka Thera Gata. I was hopelessly slow in my progress, struggling helplessly with the tedious pace of a snail, always looked down upon, mocked and despised, not only by all those who knew me, but also those who'd never even seen me, where even my own brother, my flesh and blood, too, also shunned and tried getting rid of me, scolding and insisting upon me to leave, as he repeatedly commanded, "Just get out already, never come back here ever again." Being pushed out like that, I stood there at the monastery's gate, left behind by my Sangha brothers. I found myself all alone, kicked out and abandoned, and in tears, with a heart that was now even more saddened and full of longing for the Dhamma. Then, out of nowhere, the Blessed One appeared, as the king of the Sangha approached with his soft and accepting smile, and ever so softly touched and caressed my head with sweet kind-heartedness. Then, taking me by the arm, he led me back into the courtyard of the monastery. Soon after, the great teacher, out of his limitless compassion, handed me a piece of clean cloth to be used for wiping the feet, as he instructed me. Just put all your attention on this. Resolutely focus it only upon this cloth, and as you rub it clean, continue striking away the dirt from it. Upon listening to my teacher's direct instruction given to me, I quickly and delightedly began applying the method with such unprecedented determination, exactly as he advised. Soon after, I entered into deep samadhi, working my way through the path, taking me straight to the crown of all goals within the holy life. Suddenly, I clearly saw my previous births in all their details, along with the divine eye that arose in me, piercing through with its purity wherever I turned to look. I realized then and there how the three knowledges have been attained by me. Thus, completed was now the dispensation of my teacher, the Buddha. Having now fulfilled the task, I created 1,000 versions of apanthaka, all scattered around me, engaged in different activities around the monastery. Meanwhile, I sat there within the charming mango orchard, quietly waiting until the hour for the lunch offering would be announced. It was then that the messenger arrived, having been sent by the teacher himself. Later, when he finally approached again, stating how the master had called for me, speedily I left, flying through the sky, and appeared among the gathering of bhikkhus. Having humbly worshipped and touched the teacher's feet with my head, I then sat down to one side, ready to accept the meal with the others. Knowing his bhikkhus were now all present, the Blessed One made sure I was seated alongside my fellow bhikkhus, and only then proceeded to receive the gift of dana that was offered to the Sangha. It was in this manner that the worthiest of all, the greatest among all recipients of truly worthy and heartfelt offerings, the unsurpassed field of merits everywhere, accepted that day the gift of dana out of his limitless compassion for all in the entire existence. These were the verses spoken by the Venerable Cu apanthaka. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. We are quite fortunate. I say it again and again, that we have the Dhamma still. But the Dhamma is one hand, and your willingness to practice and give it your all is the other. Together, they will wipe away, wash away the dirt in the heart. The Dhamma by itself will never work. That's why it's dying around the four corners of this planet. The teachings are dying. And I don't know about you, but I'm not going to wait for another Buddha to show up in a few 100 million years for me to say, well, hopefully I will be born at at the time of the Buddha. The next time, well, you could be the neighbor of the Buddha and never know about him. Or you could be an insect, or a dog, or a cat by that Buddha and not get a clue. Now is the time. You're alive. That says it all. You have your life. And what a powerful, incredible wealth that is. You don't have to wait for your expiration date, your death, for something miraculous to happen, for all the elements to align perfectly, the universe conspiring to get you to now suddenly have the energy or willingness to put the effort or inculcate within you the necessary qualities to attain wisdom. Wisdom and insights will only happen when you have developed equanimity. Equanimity will never happen unless you practice meditation in this practice, in this training that Lord Buddha has passed on to us. And you will not be able to meditate unless you develop some concentrative techniques. We use the metta practice. We use the breath meditation practice. We have sati and sampajanya. That's all you need. They will take you to the center of concentration, samadhi, from which you will be able to attain equanimity, upekkha. That's the thing which will allow everything else to make sense. Not your other achievements in life. You remove that practice from your life, everything else falls apart. You bring that into your life, everything else starts making sense. And whatever has to drop away from you, they will drop away from you. Relationships, this, that, toxic things, toxic habits. Even though you had framed them around your life and saying, this is who I am. So you see, your practice has everything to do with your life. Your life is your practice. But if your life is not the practice, how can there be insight? How can there be Dhamma? So maintain that persistence. And you have found the Dhamma. You have held on to the tail end of a string, and it's like, don't let go. But you have to practice. You have to practice until you really get onto the solid ground, which we call magga and phala, the path and the fruits. So I will stop here and see if there are any questions, comments, thoughts. Well, if there are, let me see, if there are no questions, comments, we'll move on. I mean, it's a beautiful sutta, as you see, and don't be surprised when, after these retreats, if you really allow yourself to be present, for them to reverberate for at least a few hours. Sometimes it might take you a day and a half for the effect of it to kind of wither. But during those hours, or a day and a half, or even a week, a lot can happen. The energy. Because what we're doing with these exploration series is we're reviving, if one would be allowed to say, the Dhamma. We're bringing it up. We're pushing away the ash, the dust, and the dirt, and allowing the gold of the Dhamma to shine through. And it can be shocking to the reality that we have created for ourselves. Just like the so-called reality of Chula Pantaka being a slow person, being dumb, being inept, inadequate, handicapped. See, all of that shatters away, gone. Gone. So that's why Lord Buddha didn't say anything about Venerable Chula Pantaka when he displayed all those abilities. He did not scold him. Other places you do have Lord Buddha scolding, but he didn't do that. Because there was also a message for those witnesses, for those individuals, as to the power of the Dhamma, not Venerable Chula Pantaka, but the power of the Dhamma, the transformative power of the Dhamma. So if you looked upon yourself as somebody to be looked down upon, I'm a terrible person. They were right about me. I'm no good for nothing type of a thing. We've all had something like this, some of us more than others. Or the opposite extreme, where there's this self-aggrandizement type of a thing, conceit. Conceit is 3 layered, right? Lord Buddha says. There's one where you look at others from a very high ground, being on a high horse, always like, everyone else is beneath you, something else. You're something else, a gift to the universe type of a thing. And the other one is the opposite, where you look down upon others. And then there is the competitive, looking at others, saying, well, she and I are kind of equal. He and I are, they're like, yeah. So those are all conceit. We shouldn't be worried about the conceit that others display towards us. The ones we bear towards ourselves, that is a tough one. That's where honesty must be there for you to see these things. So let us transfer some merit. Akasatha Chabumata Devanagamahiddhika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakhantu Lokasasanam Akasatha Chabumata Devanagamahiddhika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakhantu Desanam Akasatha Chabumata Devanagamahiddhika Punyantang Anumoditva Chirang Rakhantu Mamparanti. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. May you all be well. May you and your loved ones prosper in health, in wealth, in opportunities, successful opportunities, and all of which may they lead you and them and everyone you know to the Dhamma. And may you continuously smile with your heart from the bottom of your feet. And may you look upon yourselves as Venerable Cu saw himself at that moment, which allowed him to relinquish, to shed that old skin of his. And see, that was anatta right there for him. That was anicca for him. And that relinquishment of dukkha was like nirodha. So may I wish that upon us all. Until next time. Sukhi Hoat.